Oh, hello everyone. Good morning. So I know it's evening back in India, but here it's still the morning, so that's why I said good morning. I'm Sayee. Dr. Arun Kumar introduced me. I did my undergraduate at Stanley Medical College, and Dr. Arun Kumar was one of the postgraduates there. And I moved on to do my residency in internal medicine in the US, did a fellowship in nephrology, and then did my advanced fellowship in interventional nephrology and moved on to an academic position at University of Kentucky. So, and I'm here to share some of the tips and tricks to help you guys out with this journey, or to have a basic idea of how to go about getting to where I am, or if you're interested in doing a residency or fellowship or any sort of graduate training in the US after you finish your medical school. So first, I would start with my disclosures. I have no disclosures. This is not I'm not affiliated to anything, and I have no disclosures. So the most important thing through USMLE journey, if you ask me or you ask anyone who has done this, the most important thing they would say is that you have to have the desire that you will not give up no matter what happens. And you have to always believe in yourself. And you have to always have the idea that you can and you will never give up. And that is the most important, or the single most important thing in your journey to becoming a US licensed physician. So I just want to clarify that my talk is just an overview of applying for residency, and it just gives you all the steps or all the dots that you have to cross and all the T's that you have to tick, and so that you can get into a successful residency match. My talk is not a gospel for residency application, and my talk is no ways comprehensive for any individual applicants. But I will try my best, which is my level best, to try to give you a comprehensive overview of all the steps and all the things that you have to have before you start applying and you start getting into this. So before we start, I just want you to take a look at all of these acronyms. And these are the acronyms that are going to plague you throughout your process of application and after you've started your residency. So starting with, what is USMLE? USMLE is the exam. So it's the United States Medical Licensing Examination. It is SOP, which is the statement of purpose, which is basically what you write so that your application is reviewed, and people who are reviewing your application read and try to understand what your purpose of applying the residency, or let's say you're applying for some research, you're applying for some clerkship. The statement of purpose kind of defines your purpose or what you're going to get by doing that. SON is the statement of need. So that is what you have to get from the Indian government when you have to pursue residency in the US. So that happens after your match, and when you're ready to start your residency, you have to get the statement of need, which is a letter given by the Indian government. LOR is letter of recommendation. So the letter of recommendation is what accompanies your application for residency. Usually the application requires about 3 to 4 LORs in order for the application to be complete. the more LORs you have from the US, the better. But home LORs, such as a letter of recommendation from your department chief in medicine or your department chief in surgery, they also help a lot. And then comes MSPE, which is MSPE, it's your medical school performance evaluation. It's kind of, you know how we have transcripts from the university. MSP is kind of very similar to transcripts, but it does it in a different way, because in a university transcript that we often get from the Indian universities, they just give you how much you scored and what is the max. The MSP is slightly different, that it actually ranks you among your class. So basically it says this is what your class's average score was, and they give you a percentile distribution of your class's average scores, and they say your score was either in the top 25% or top 50%, and you were in the top 5th percentile or 25th percentile, and they kind of rank you among your peers. So the MSP is kind of a pretty important document that applies, that is essential with your application. So the USMLE, SOP, LOR, and MSP are essential when you apply for a residency. And when you're applying for a residency, the 5 things below, which is these are the organizations that you need to keep in mind. All of these guys are the organizations that kind of help you to get through your application process. So the first among those is ECFMG. So ECFMG stands for Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Grads. So in order for you to apply to residency, and in order for you to train here as a resident, you have to be certified by ECFMG. That is the number one requirement. And there is no way you can do anything in the US clinically without having the ECFMG certification. And ECFMG certification essentially happens as soon as you're done with your USMLE steps 1 and 2. And ECFMG is the organization that verifies your medical school. They verify that you are the person. So they verify identity, they verify your medical school education. And then they are the ones who you submit your medical school diploma to. And once you have all of that and you do your steps 1 and 2, they give you a certificate that says you are certified by ECFMG, and that is the basic requirement for you to do any sort of clinical training, hands-on clinical training in the US. AAMC is the Association of American Medical Colleges. The reason why I put it here is there are some medical schools in India which have affiliation to AAMC. And if you have that, it's easier to get clerkships, which I will get into later, what are clerkships and stuff. But it is kind of, it is an association where they do recognize some foreign medical schools, and you can kind of get an easy headway or more headway to get into a clerkship. And then NRMP is the National Resident Matching Program. So NRMP is NRMP I would equate to counseling after your NEET exams. So NRMP is where you submit all of your rank lists to, and they are the ones who conduct the match. And they are the ones who tell you, basically, this is where you matched and kind of that. They take care of all of that. FSMB is Federation of State Medical Board, which is kind of an umbrella organization of all the state medical boards in the country, in the US. They are the ones who conduct your step 3, and they are the ones who are in charge of giving your state licensing. And FCVS is kind of goes along with FSMB. So when you apply for your medical license, you want your credentials to be verified by FCVS. The reason why I say that is then it takes care of the stuff of all your very individual college education being verified by different states throughout your career. Because when I did my residency in New Jersey, so I had to be licensed there. And then I did my fellowship in Wisconsin, so I had to change my state licensing to Wisconsin. And then after that, I had to move to Kentucky, and I had to apply for a license in Kentucky. So all of these individual states would require that your verification, your credentials be verified from your medical school back home. But if you are ECFMG certified, which is number one, you get your ECFMG certification, you finish your residency, so then and then you get your step 3, which is your FSMB certification. Then you can basically get verified by FCVS. And once that happens, you can actually transfer your credentials from them to every state they apply, and they don't have to send stuff back to your medical school, or they don't have to verify it back home. So that kind of takes care of all of that. NBME, which is the National Board of Medical Examiners, is basically the parent organization for USMLE. So USMLE is administered, evaluated, reassessed. Your transcripts, all of them happens through NBME, which is your National Board of Medical Examiners. And then GME, or Graduate Medical Education, is the office that deals with all of your residency stuff. So if you're applying for an observership, or if you're applying for any kind of something in an academic hospital, graduate medical education is basically what happens or controls all of your paperwork. So now that we are done with the acronyms, we'll move on. So the pyramid of medicine, we always think, we'll say, once you finish medical school, you got your MBBS, and then you go into USMLE. But the actual pyramid is, USMLE is actually the stepping stone for you to go up in your licensing career. So don't think about that. Once you've done USMLE, that is the end. USMLE is just the base of the pyramid. USMLE makes sure that you can get a residency, and most physicians after the residency get into a fellowship, which is kind of your super specialization back home. And after a fellowship, then you have to find a work, and work is where you have to kind of get your license and your visas and a lot of stuff. So the pyramid of medicine, USMLE stays at the bottom, and that is the first step that you have to achieve so that you can move up towards your goal of becoming a US licensed physician. So this scenario, I put together kind of an ideal scenario. Again, not a lot of people fit into this scenario, but this is kind of an ideal scenario, which would make sure that you can get into residency by the time a year after you finished your medical school. So assuming you're finishing your internship completion in March or April, and your degree certificate comes in August, you have to be sure to get your medical school transcripts even before your internship completion. The reason is it takes quite a bit of time to get those things to get those things made from the university. So even when you're doing a CRRI, make sure you get your medical school transcripts. And by the time you finish your internship completion, which is probably March or April, you should have already been taken your USMLE steps 1 and 2, if possible, or you should take them right before June to July of the year you finish your internships. The reason is you have to get ECFMG certified before you interview, because a lot of programs would not consider you for interview if you're not ECFMG certified. And to get ECFMG certified, you will need your transcripts, you will need your step scores, and you will need your degree certificate. So it is kind of a short timeline, and you have to submit your applications by September of that year. So it is kind of a very, very short timeline. So you have to make sure that you have your medical school transcripts before your completion. And once you complete, your USMLE steps, make sure you apply for that ECFMG certification, and you submit your applications for residency. So to submit your application for residency, you don't have to be ECFMG certified. They only expect you to have scores on your step 1 and step 2. But for interviews and anything further, you have to be ECFMG certified at that point. So, and your interviews usually start from October to Feb. That's when your interviews are going to start. So I would suggest by September, you have to get all of these checked out and crossed out. And after that, you can focus on these stuff, which is your post-interview. And the most important thing, which you have to also factor in, is your US clinical experience. The US clinical experience is very, very important because that's where you get all of your LORs. So let's say you have, let's say, for example, you're applying for medicine, which is what I did. So you have to make sure you have at least 2 months of US clinical experience, either, and I will talk to you about different types, but some US clinical experience, at least 2 months. So you have at least 2 LORs that you can submit to your interview applications, and you have 2 LORs from your internship back in India. So that makes it the total of 4 LORs that you can submit for the interview. So again, you have to factor all of these guys in before September of that year if you're trying to apply the year you're finishing your CRRI. And if you want to push it out a year, it gives you more, it stretches the timeline a little bit. But again, you have to make sure you get all of these guys started out so that the next part can proceed. And after interviews, once you have interviewed at X amount of programs, you get to rank them. So let's say you interviewed for 10 programs, and whatever program you like, you rank them on the order of your preference. The programs do the same. They rank candidates on the order of their preference. And then in March, the match happens. And once you have, the match is basically weighted for your preference. So let's say you interviewed at University of Kentucky, for example. I'll say I interviewed at University of Kentucky, and that is my first choice. And University of Kentucky decides that I am their first choice. And if we both are the first choices on both the lists, then that's a match. But let's say my first choice is University of Kentucky, and University of Kentucky's 10th choice is me, but the program has only 4 spots and they're full. Even though my first choice is University of Kentucky, I would not get it because depending on other candidates' preferences, it's weighted for the candidates. It's not weighted for the universities or any other medical centers. So so whatever programs you like, if they like you back, the highest chances you land in that program. So that's how the match happens. And if you don't get matched for some reason, the programs you liked, they didn't like you, and the programs you didn't like, they liked you, but they were so low on your rank list that, or they got filled before that, so you went out of a match, you can do something called a scramble, where the unfilled programs come out and the unmatched applicants come out, and you can try to get into that, which happens right the week after the match. So you can try for the scramble. And then after you have secured a spot, you get into a statement of need, which is you have to get it from the Indian government. And once you get the statement of need, you apply for the visa. And after that, you get into residency in July. So that is basically the whole timeline of how you go about this. Now I'm going to tell you how I did this. So this was my timeline. Again, so when I was in Stanley Medical College in 2013, there were me and a couple of friends who decided that we wanted to do USMLE right from like 3rd year of medical school. So, and then we had a lot of things that were going on. So I had a lot of personal things. So I did not take my step 1. So what I did was I finished my internship right around April. I took my step 1 in May. I took my step 2 in June. I took my step 3 in August. And I started my US clinical experience right about in June. So this is not a recommended timeline. I would not recommend that you go through this. The only reason I say that is if you screwed any one of these exams, or if I did not get my degree certificate in August, I would not have gone through that path. So it did not give me any fail safe, or did not give me any ideas. So basically all I had to do was I had to make sure that everything was happening in a very, very tight timeline. So I applied for residency even before my scores of my CK came out, and I got certified right around October. I started my interviews right after my certification, which was about November. I did my rank list obviously in February. I did get matched. Again, this was 2013, 7 years ago. Things were a little bit different. And then I got my SO and I got my visa. I took step 3 after I joined my residency. Again, this was 7 years ago when step 3 was not a requirement for a lot of programs. But now you have to have step 3 within your first year of residency, or a lot of programs even prefer that you would have taken it before so that they would rank you. So 7 years ago, things were a little bit different, a little bit relaxed, and I kind of made it through by that. But things are much more complicated now. There is no more of CS at this. Hold on, I think my screen dropped off. Okay, doing it right now. There you go. So yeah, so things were off a different timeline then. I would say because things were off a different timeline about 7 years ago. It was not as competitive as it is right now. So, and of course, the biggest thing is we don't have CS anymore, which is the most recent update. And CK is also changing to a pass or fail format. Sorry, step 1 is also changing to a pass or fail format too. So those are some changes that are coming out within this year to the next year. But this is kind of my timeline. So again, like I said before, you need to start your US clinical experience so that you get those LORs in before your application. At least 2 LORs from US is recommended. You need, personally, if I had to do this again, I would have taken step 1 way back during my 3rd year of med school and did this CK right around here. That way I could have been a little bit relaxed and I could have had a much better timeline of when I was applying for this whole thing, rather than getting this certification back here. So I would certainly say this, that if I had my ECFMG certification right here before I applied, my chances of interviews in the US programs would have been much, much higher, which would have given me a better option at this rank list and a match. But again, things worked out for me, but that is not recommended of what you guys should do. Okay, moving on. So going back, what are the critical steps? So the first step is you have to apply to ECFMG in medical school. And so this is kind of silly, but that is usually the longest step of all of this. So you basically submit for your application in medical school, which is you submit your transcripts. There is a separate form that you fill out, and you get that form, you get it signed by your dean, and you submit it to ECFMG saying, hey, I'm a graduate from this medical school and I want to register for USMLE. So, and then ECFMG, depending on your medical school, they can e-verify you, where it is as simple as an email link that gets checked off, compared to some medical schools where they actually physically send the documentation for verification. So it can be as quick as a day, or it can be as time consuming as 2 to 3 months. So the first step is you have to apply to ECFMG and you have to get yourself registered. The second most critical step is you have to have your USMLE scores prior to you submitting your application for your residency. You need to have your letters of recommendation. and you need to have some US clinical experience prior to your application submission. And the LORs, US clinical experience, the closer they are to your application year, the better. What do I mean by that is, let's say you're applying for in 2020 to match in 2021. If your US clinical experience is in 2020, that helps you. But if your US clinical experience is in 2018 and your LORs are from 2019, they do help you, but they're not as helpful as experience in 2020. So try to get them as close to when you're applying. And again, I cannot stress on this enough. You have to be ECFMG certified prior to interviews, which is you have to submit your diploma from your medical school back in India. You have to have steps 1 and 2 and everything else with the new requirements done before you get the ECFMG certification. And this has to be done before you start interviewing. The reason I say that is a lot of programs will ask for your certificate when you're interviewing so that they kind of know who to rank and who not to. Because if you're not certified by then, the chances of you getting certified later in the year go slim. So they don't want to rank you because you're going to take up a spot. And if you're preferring to work on a H1 visa, then you need to have step 3 completed close to your match results so they can process your H1 visa. And other things are, you need your statement of need, you need to work on your visa, the actual residency visa, your medical license, your state medical license, and the GME from the residency program would be on top of those things. They will help you out how to get it done. And you will have a lot of Facebook groups, you will have your co-residents who kind of joined the same year. So they will all help you out. And those are the things that you will find your own groups. And then of course, the last step is you join residency on July 1st. So again, time is key, and which is what is the most important thing. So you should not learn to give up, and you have to always have that timeline in mind because you're always racing against time. And the first thing I would say is do not try to do everything in the last minute. If you try to do everything in the last minute, that's when things get slipped, things get lost, you're not on a timeline, and then you lose out on those things. So if you can apply September 1st, I would apply September 1st rather than September 15th, even though the applications are open for 15 days. So don't try to wait till September 15th to apply if you can apply September 1st. And everything, if you want to applying to ECFMG, if you want to applying for USMLE, apply early. If you have decided this is what you want to do it. Get everything in order early. Don't wait until the last minute to get your transcripts. If you know you need transcripts, start working on them the same day. If you're going to wait till the very end when they're asking for transcripts, it's going to take more time to get them, and that is going to push off your timeline because everything in the US works on timelines. You have to understand, they open one day and they close that day. You cannot have that. You do not have any extensions. You do not have anything else. And you have to get all your stuff in order so that you can go to the next step. So if you know these are the requirements for this step, get it done. As soon as you know that, get it done. And I would not stress this, and I will stress this a lot, that depending on your institution, verification can take a day or it can take a month. So I do not know how every institution is, but when I did it in Stanley, I can tell you that my verification took 4 weeks. But I do know of stories where someone's verification took 2 months because they lost a mail. And that's what my last step is. Emails get lost. So follow up. If you applied for something, you're waiting on a verification, it hasn't happened in 4 weeks, follow it up because mails get lost. And this is not Speed Post or FedEx. It takes a lot of the regular post. So it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for a mail to come from the US to India. And from your medical school back to US, it takes another 2 weeks. So if you lose a mail and if you don't stay on the timeline, you're going to get pushed back by 2 to 3 weeks. And again, if you're going on a short timeline, it is critical that you get them, you follow them. Otherwise, you're going to lose out on the timeline and you cannot make it. So now I'm going to talk about the different exams. So I have updated this to kind of what the current scenario is. So there are 3 steps. step 1, step 2, and step 3. Step 1 is basic sciences, which is basically, it tests your fundamentals, it tests your anatomy, physiology. I would say up to your second year is what is included in step 1. And that is why a lot of medical school graduates in India, as well as in the US. So if you meet any any medical school graduate from the United States, they would take their step 1 in their medical school, third year of medical school, which is because they transition from your basic sciences to clinical sciences. So step 1 is predominantly basic sciences, your first 2 years of medical school. So the ideal scenario to take it will be in the third year, but you can take it anytime after. I'm just saying this is an ideal scenario. It is a 1-day exam. There are about 8 blocks. There are about 40 questions per block with a maximum of 280 questions. It tests on all of your basic principles, and it's set up in 60-minute block. So you're spending about 8 hours in front of a computer, answering about 40 questions per hour. So you have about 1.5 minutes per question. And there is a maximum limit of questions, and because not all blocks have equal questions. So some blocks will have 6, some blocks will have less questions, some blocks will have more questions. So they set those maximum limit questions. Step 2 is clinical sciences. So again, step 2 is right after your third and fourth year of medical school. Basically, it tests more of your clinical sciences. And step 2 is also a 1-day exam. It is 8 blocks, and there is about a max of 40 per block with a maximum of 318 questions. And step 1 will test on your basic principles, whereas step 2 will test on your application of your basic principles. Again, the blocks are again 60-minute blocks. So you need to have both steps 1 and 2 finished. And I'll talk about the new rules because CS is currently not administered because of the COVID-19 stuff. And I don't think they're going to restart it, but they might. I do not know what the right answer to that is, but right now CS is not administered. So you have a separate pathway for you to going through. Or you have 5 different pathways for which you have to go through. But step 1 and step 2, along with those pathways, is the basic requirement so that you can apply for a residency. Step 3 is a requirement in most institutions that I know of within your first year of internship or before you join them. So step 3 is a 2-day exam. It is basically tests your clinical practice, and it is set up in 2 days. So the first day is 6 blocks of about 38 to 39 questions with a max of 232. It's about 7 hours long. Again, it's a 60-minute block as well. And then the second day is again 6 blocks. So you have 2 separate things on the second day. You have about 13 case simulations that you have to do, which is 10 to 20 minutes each, which is kind of tests how you treat patients or how you approach a patient. And those are the second half of the exam. And the first half of the exam on day 2 is you have these quick 6 blocks, which is 30 per block of 180 questions. The total duration of the exam is 9 hours on the second day. On the first day is about 7 hours. But keep in mind, you are not answering only questions for 2 hours in the morning, because it's 2 or 3 hours in the morning, and 6 hours of these are simulations, which is your case-based, or they give you a scenario of a patient coming to you, and you have to kind of triage, diagnose, and treat at the same time. So that's what those case simulations are going to test you on: how you triage, how you diagnose, and how you treat. And it's a kind of a very interactive format where you have to kind of do the things, and once you get done, the case closes off. Either you save the patient or you kill the patient. Either way, the case will close off. And those are your simulations on step 3. Again, it purely tests your clinical practice. So that's what your step 3 is. But the case vignettes, or most of your questions in all these exams will be case vignettes, but what they're testing you on will be slightly different, but depending on which step you're taking. So for example, they'll ask you the pathological finding of myocardial infarction with a case vignette that describes MI for step 1. In step 2, they'll ask you what is the first drug of choice that you treat, or what should you do when you have a myocardial infarction. Step 3 will test you how you triage, like how do you go approach that patient who is presenting to you with myocardial infarction. So that's basically kind of a broad overview of these 3 steps. And that is similar across the exams too. So step 1 is will test you more on your basic sciences. Step 2 will test on your clinical approach, and step 3 will test on how you practice. Oops, sorry, hold on. Okay, so how long would you need to prepare for these exams? And I think step 1 will need about 6 months of full-time preparation. The reason why I say 6 months is for step 1 is because you need to get your concepts right, and you need to also understand the application of concepts, which is kind of very, very important when you're studying for step 1. So when you're reading for step 1, you have to understand all of the clinical scenarios, as well as how the basic concepts tie back to those clinical scenarios, and how do you apply the basic concepts into those clinical scenarios. So step 1 usually takes about 6 to 8 months at least of full-time preparation. And when I say full-time preparation, you are spending about 6 to 8 hours a day reading, doing questions every single day. So that's what step 1 takes. Step 2, on the other hand, takes about 2 to 3 months of full-time, because you are building up on your knowledge from step 1. And if you've done a really good job with your step 1, your step 2 preparation is much, much easier, because you're basically building up on the concepts that you learned, and you're just applying the clinical answers for those concepts that you learned. Step 3, I would say you probably require a month of full-time preparation, but when you're preparing for step 3, you're basically in the middle of interviews, you're traveling for interviewing, or you're in the middle of your US clinical experience, you're doing something when you're doing step 3, or you might be an intern working in a residency program, or you're doing some things, you're doing an MPH or something. So I would say step 3 takes about 3 to 4 months of part-time, which is probably 2 to 3 hours a day or 2 hours a day. And you just read, you do questions, and you practice your simulations and stuff like that. So overall, I would say you would need close to a year. So let's say 6 plus 2 is 8 months, 8 plus 3 is 11. So you'll need close to a year for your steps 1 and 2. And then after that, step 3 is basically you can do it right in the middle of your interview season and when you're doing your US clinical experience. So that's how your time for preparation for these exams would be. So what are the key differences in these exams? So again, when you compare exams across the board, I did take, I think I was one of the first batches to try NEET when it came out in 2013, or I don't think so, maybe. I did take the national entrance exam, I did take JIPMER, I did write AIMS, I did do the whole Indian testing exams during my CRI. And again, the questions have changed, but I'm just trying to summarize all the key differences between the USMLE exams and your other exams. So step 1, the first thing is step 1 is moving away from their score-based format to a pass-fail format. I do not know how that's going to affect or change how applicants are selected, but that change is happening. So I'm just going to say that it's going to be, the step 1 is you know those basic sciences or you don't. And the USMLEs are standardized tests with percentile scores. So you do get a 3-digit score, and then they will tell you, like, on their percentile graph, based on your 3-digit score, you're on the 95th percentile or you're on the 99th percentile, which means you're among the top 1% or the top 5% or the top 10%. So they do give you a distribution along with your percentile. And that is important when residency programs decide to call you for interview. And obviously, if you're in the top 1 percentile, which is you're on the 99th percentile or the top 1%, you have a higher chance of getting invited to a more competitive program compared to the 95th percentile or the top 5%. And test questions, not all the questions that appear in the test are going to be part of your final score. They do have some questions that are standardized and some questions undergoing evaluation. They don't tell you which questions are which, but they do have some standardization questions too, which is kind of similar to NEET, but they have been doing this a lot more years, so they have a bigger question bank, I would say. The exams are long. And again, when I say long, they are really long. They are like 8 hours with breaks and lunch breaks and stuff like that. So they are not a test of your knowledge, but they're also a test of your endurance. So you can be someone, you like, whenever I did my exams, I will be so fresh for the first two blocks. But then as I went on, by seventh block, eighth block, especially in step two, when you're doing the 9 blocks, it's kind of, it gets repetitive and it gets over, and you're staring at the computer screen for 8 hours. You have to, and you have to eat, you have to drink, you have to hydrate, you have to keep your brain going. So it is a test of your endurance. So whenever you're doing practice questions, you have to factor that into, like, I would say, if you're doing questions for 1 hour a day and that's it, you've been dying, and that's all you've been doing, and you're trying to take these tests, man, I will tell you, it's going to be really hard. I would say when you're practicing for these exams, make sure you practice for like 6 to 7 hours on a week or 2 weeks before you take the exam. Start practicing 6 to 7 hours to build your endurance up, to keep sure that you can go for those 6 hours. You can keep your brain functioning at the highest potential. You make sure you have enough snacks, enough fluid, enough glucose, enough energy drinks, however you want to do it. You have to endure those 8 hours. And I've known a lot of my friends who are really good medically, but they couldn't do the test because they didn't get their endurance up. So you have to make sure that you endure the test. And again, the biggest thing is, if you want to improve your scores, it's, you have to change the way you approach the question, and not just the answer. So what I'm trying to tell you is, let's say you read a question, you get the answer wrong. What do? We just say, okay, I got this answer wrong. I'm just gonna find out the right answer. And next time I get this question, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna select that answer. But these tests are designed in such a way that you cannot do that. They would they would hone to the same answer, but the answering will be different, or the way of thinking will be different. So you have to try to change your way of thinking. You have to change the way you approach a question, and you have to change the format by which you take out the answers that you don't like them or you don't think they're appropriate, and you try to hone in on the right answer. So you have to fundamentally change how you take the test so to get better scores, and not just find the right answers to get the better scores. Um, I would have a better example probably later, but it's basically not doing the same thing, because if you think like the same, you're going to get the same score no matter how much you change. But if you have to change your thinking, then you will get a better score, because that's what these tests are designed to test you. They test your thinking, not just the right answer. They test how you're arriving at the answer. And this tests do not test facts. So there are no facts involved, but it will test you how you apply those facts into answers. And again, it does not test the diagnosis. It tests you how you understand or how you come to the diagnosis. And the biggest thing is, once you apply for ECFMG, or once you take your step one, your eligibility is valid for 7 years. So you have up to 7 years to finish all the tests and you get your ECFMG certification. So your total duration for this should not be more than 7 years, because if you take step one and you take 7 years out, that drops off. You have to take step one again. So that's basically what I said, eligibility. So all US medical graduates take step USMLE. So USMLE is kind of their exam that prepares them for residency, and they take it too. So you are also on the same boat as them, and they are also on the same boat as you. And they take step one, they take step two, and they also take step three. And they used to take CS2, but now they don't. But that's how they roll through as well. And you are also doing the same exact thing. And once you have taken step 1 and 2, this is the new change as of this year. This is the newest change as of this year, which is because usually what happened until the last year was you take step 1, you take step 2 CK and CS, and then ECFMG certifies you once you have your degree. But this year, because step 1 has not been administered, you have about 5 pathways, which is, I think, depending on if you're licensed in India or you have had some sort of experience or you have some exams. So there are 5 pathways, and you can try to figure out in the ECFMG website which pathway you qualify for. And once you select the pathway, you let ECFMG know, and they will administer this test called OET, which is an English proficiency test. And once you get that test, once you get through that test, you will be certified by ECFMG, which makes you eligible. And again, the step 3, you have to complete it by intern year. The sooner, the better. If you're applying for a competitive residency, you need to be better qualified because you're competing with US medical grads, and you're competing not only with your peers, but with your peers throughout the world. So you have to improve your qualifications, which is you have to have good scores, clinical experience, research, LORs, and all of them. Scores, unfortunately, do serve as an important criteria for selection for international medical graduates. That is because, again, these programs do receive a lot of applications. So scores do serve as one of the criteria, if not all of the criteria, but a very important criteria. Contacts and recommendations are key. So try to develop your contacts, try to have people who would recommend you to programs, and those are key to securing interviews. And don't try to name drop, because that may help you or fire on you. But if you have someone who can directly recommend themselves, try to get them. And that is what will help you to secure interviews. So moving on, I think a couple of people had questions on US clinical experience. So US clinical experience is broadly divided into 3 things. So the first one is clerkship, and then there is observership, and then there is research. So to do clerkship, which is basically you are a visiting medical student in the United States, you have to still be in medical school, because clerkship is basically you are a visiting medical student. Observership is observership is not hands-on, means you shadow a physician, you can observe what they do, but you cannot touch patient, you cannot document on patient. As a clerk or a rotating medical student, you can have hands-on experience with you can actually touch the patient, and you can document for the patient, and you can actually work like an intern under your resident or under your attending or whatever. But to be a clerk or to do your clerkship, you have to still be in medical school. You cannot do a clerkship when you are in internship, because you have basically graduated from medical school. So if you want to do clerkship, the ideal time is when you are in medical school, or right after you finish your medical school and before you join internship. Because once you started your internship, or once you get your provisional certificate that you says that you have finished your medical school, you cannot do your clerkship anymore. And then the last but not least, research. And again, you have tons and tons of research going at every institution across the country, and it can be done anytime. And research can be hands-on or hands-off, depending on the opportunity that you get. So that can go both ways. Out of these, the only thing that pays money, or you can get a monthly money amount for doing stuff, is research. So you can get paid research positions where they'll pay you a small amount a month for you to be able to do it. But clerkship and observerships are always unpaid. And with research, there's no application fee. You basically try to figure out what your area of interest is, and you try to approach someone who has your similar area of interest, and you try to get with them and do their research project. But with clerkship and observership, usually it's application based. and most programs will have it on their website if they're accepting clerkships or if they're accepting observerships. They usually clerkships do have an application fee, and they also have some requirements. Um, Most programs will say at least a step 1 as the requirement for a clerkship and observership. For research, there are usually no requirements, but if they're going to try for a paid research, they might ask you to have some English proficiency tests, or like TOEFL or IELTS or something, so that before they take you. But clerkships, I cannot tell you, but there are some programs which I have come across that say USMLE step 1 is a must. And observership, depending on the program, they'll say step 1. Some programs will say EA or NA for no exams, but you can have whatever. And clerkship and waitlist observerships are difficult to obtain because there's usually a wait list of people who apply every year. So you might have to get on the wait list for a specific time, and maybe if the wait list moves up, you will get it. So apply early, get things early, done early, so that you can get all of those. Research, there's not a wait list, but it all depends on what research projects the institutions are running and how much like they can take, give, visas. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on with research, but there's not a wait list and there's no application fees. So depending on what you do, the reason you do all of this is to get LORs, right? So your letter of recommendations. So the strongest LOR you can get either with the clerkship or research, and you can develop a lot of contacts and get recommendations with either clerkship or research. You can do that with observership too. The reason why I say observership LORs are not as strong is because it's hands off. You're not touching the patient. So they're not gonna say in your LOR how great your clinical skills are because you're not touching the patient. So if you do a clerkship, your LOR is gonna be pretty legit because they're going to be like, oh yeah, he took care of these patients. I saw him present cases. I saw him document. He's great. If you do research, they're going to comment on your research skills. Like you organized this database, you did this statistic, you presented this poster, you published this paper, and that gives you more contacts, more recommendations, a lot of stuff. But in observership, they can comment on some stuff. You gave a presentation, you talked about stuff, but they cannot comment on your clinical skills, which is kind of important when you're applying for a residency because residency is predominantly clinical. So if you try for clerkship, great, that's awesome. If you don't get a clerkship, observership is good to get your head into the LORs or to get your LORs done, but they would not be as strong as a clerkship LOR, or they would not be as strong as a research LOR. But keep in mind, a research LOR can also not be clinical, but they are stronger LORs. And if you're applying for some programs which are heavily invested in research, then the research LORs do help. Again, so clerkships and research can make or break your spot in the program, but observership solely breaks your spot. It does not make your spot because they're not observing your clinical skills. So that's why I said these can make or break, these can make or break, this only breaks the spot. The most amount of contacts you develop is basically when you're doing research, because you meet a lot of researchers, you go to conferences, you present posters, you develop you meet peers who can recommend you to other programs. So you do develop a lot of contacts when you're doing research. You do develop contacts when you're doing clerkship and observership as well, but not as much as when you're doing research. And again, if you want a competitive fellowship, or if you want to do something really competitive that is kind of like a hard to get residency, then the biggest help would be research, because the more academically advanced an institution is, the more competitive an institution is, they tend to focus more on your research skills. So if you want to get into a competitive fellowship, if you are trying for, let's say, interventional cardiology or structural heart, or you want to do interventional nephrology, or you want to do advanced gastroendoscopy, then you need to have that research, because they are looking for those stuff. They are looking for the research to get you into those academic institutions, which do not take IMG, so they would want you to be very well versed in research. Observerships and clerkships will get you to a residency, but if you have a research experience, let's say you do 2 years of research in a lab and you're applying for a very competitive fellowship, the chances of you getting that fellowship are much, much higher because you did that research and you're applying there. And again, when I said make or break, what I'm trying to tell you is if you are a very good medical student in your clerkship, or if you got an excellent researcher, the chances of you getting into the same place are much higher. But when you're an observer, they're not observing your clinical skills. So they do not know if they can take you into their program. But if you're not a good observer, as in you're not interested in presenting or you're not looking up the stuff they asked you to do, then you will not get into the program. That's a guarantee. But they may or may not consider you when you are an observer, but they will consider you if you are a researcher in that institution or if you are a clerk in that institution. Okay, so why do you have to do these stuff, right? It's very important. And I keep saying that because LORs, this is the stuff that gives you your LORs. LOR, like I said before, is your letter of recommendation. So if you need an LOR, you have to have US clinical experience. And LOR is these requirement for interview selection. So whenever you are in an interviews or if you're getting called for an interview, they are based on your LORs, and to get your LORs, you need this clinical experience. It also does this thing where you develop contacts. What do contacts do? They're gonna recommend you to different programs and they're gonna try to get you more interviews. The more interviews you go to, the higher is your likelihood of ending into a residency. Because let's say you go to one interview and you like them, but they don't like you. Even if you submit the rank list, the chances of you matching is very, 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 very low, because if they don't like you, you're not going to match there. They have to literally rank you in their top 10 or top 5, depending on how many spots they have, so that you can match. But let's say you go to 10 interviews, the chances of you matching are greater than 90%. So the more interviews you get, the better are your chances. I would say for an IMG, I think you should have at least 7 to 10 interviews. That means your chances of matching are greater than 90%. The less than 5 interviews or less than 3, the chances of you matching are about less than 40%. So you still can match depending on the program and depending on how strong your credentials are. But it's just the process of playing your odds. And US clinical experience also helps you to learn, navigate, understand the system better. Because unlike the Indian medical system, the US system is very, very different. We do a lot of things that are kind of cutting edge, evidence-based. There are subtle differences that you learn when you do it. It is different. The clinical experience is the same. Like the patients are not different, but the way you treat patients or the way you talk to patients, the way you approach patients, the way you approach a test, the way you define a test, the way you're following it up, that's all different. And you need to learn those things to help you in your path. And that's what they're looking for as well. So you have to do that for that. Your research and clerkship experience helps in competitive fellowships. And again, depending on what you're doing, there are people who actually found some interesting cases during their clerkship and they have presented that in national conferences. And when you're presenting something in a national conference, you get exposed to more audience, again, more contacts. And last but not the least, you can always publish. So if you have not had any publications, all of these experiences will help you get your publications, improve your publications. And when you publish, it adds to your CV when you're applying. And that kind of pushes you or separates you from the other applicants who do not have publications. So anything and everything you do helps you to differentiate from other applicants. So those are some very, very important things. So those are very, very important things that you have to kind of get through before you apply. Okay, sorry, my screen is stuck again. Okay. So the other US experiences are, these are some things that are also available. So you can do these, which are about 2 years. They do give you some sort of an US experience. They're not clinical. That's why I said they are US experience. So they have their own requirements. So you have to either take GRE, TOEFL, other stuff, and they are not clinical, but they can be helpful because you have an additional degree from the US. So they do help you. They are not paid unless you land up some kind of a teaching gig on your side. And they do take you from the hospital for 2 years. So you can get a Master of Public Administration or Master of Science, Clinical Sciences, or you can do an MBA. And those do help as well. And these are separate US experiences than US clinical experience. And again, this may help you with your residency or fellowship, but you have to, it's a US clinical experience is a must have. It's not, without US clinical experience, you cannot get into a residency. Without US experience, which is your MPH, MBA, or MSCS, you can get into a residency. So what do you do when you are in medical school? So the first step is you have to apply for ECFMG, get yourself verified, get your name in the system. And you have to do that in your second year or third year. That's how early you have to start when you're in medical school. Again, you can start it later, but the steps get pushed back later too. So that's what happens when you do it later. And then you have to try to take USMLE step 1 during the third year of medical school, which is your basic sciences. So this is kind of an ideal timeline for if you're applying. So I would say before your third year, and then apply for clerkship and do it before your internship so that you got your US clinical experience. Apply for step 2 and try to take it during internship or right after internship so that you stay on that timeline, and apply for observership after you finish internship. And by this way, what you're essentially trying to do is, one, you got your clerkship, right about here. So you have some strong LORs and you're doing your observership right close to your application. So you have both clerkship and observership. And by that means you would have, the chances of you getting high LORs and contacts are much higher, and you did all of that. And let's say the institution you did your clerkship, you did a great job. The chances of you ending in that institution is much higher because they know you as a clerkship, they're going to take you as an observer as well in the same institution. And if they still like you, you can get into the same program. So it is kind of important, and it is essential. If you can do this, it's awesome. If you cannot, that's okay. But if you do this, it kind of guarantees you a really good finish. Let's say you start about later. Let's say you haven't done this. You start this in you're finishing internship and you're taking your step 1. You take step 1. You cannot do a clerkship anymore because that time has passed. So then you directly move on to observership. You apply for step 2, you do observership, and you do all of that, like kind of similar to what I did, but take your time, make sure you have enough time to complete all the other steps too. Okay, so is research important? Yes, research is important. And I would say not just research back here, or not just research during your clerkship or observership, but research in India. Anything you publish or anything you present increases your chances of meeting mentors who will recommend you into a good university program. I cannot stress this enough, because let's say you're doing some research in India and you go to a local conference and present. You will meet someone who has ties to someone else, and they will be able to recommend you to the next person who will help you in the journey. So if you're doing any research, it's awesome. Keep it going. And if you can get into any other research, try it and keep doing it. The more research you do, the better post you are to get into a competitive program. But that does not mean is research absolutely, it's research a very minimum requirement. What I'm trying to tell you is, if you have excellent scores, let's say you have scores in your steps more than 250, you can get into a non-competitive specialty without any research. But if you have a score of 250s and you have excellent research, the chances of you matching into a really competitive program is much higher. So everything adds up. Anything you do adds up and everything adds up. So I would say if you can do research, do it. It helps you. Not only just for then, but it also helps you in the future for fellowships too. So again, an ideal scenario for you, for anyone in medical school, anyone in this talk in medical school would be finishing step 1 in 3rd year with a decent score, about 250s. You did a clerkship for a month during internship, or if your medical school allows, 2 years during internship. 2 months, sorry, 2 years, sorry, 2 months. If you did clerkship for 2 months during an internship, and then you apply for observership or research after your internship, you finished step 2 after internship, again with a score of 250s, you took your test, you qualified for one of the pathways, and you got certified by ECFMG within the same year of you finishing your internship. That should be your ideal scenario if you're doing medical school, like if you're in medical school right now. Now, moving on. So you've done all of that in medical school. You've got your scores, you got observerships, you got your clerkship, you've done all of your internship stuff. Nice. So the preliminary programs are kind of a bridge to help you into categorical program. And the categorical programs are longer and they kind of help you transition. And it's kind of an, which one, from where do you want me to repeat? Just the tracks or? Okay. Okay, so in a prelim program is basically a 1-year program. After a prelim program, you do not continue training. You're done with that year and you have to stop. A categorical program it trains you in the specialty of your choice. So it's usually 3 years or longer, and you continue training until you finish in that specialty. So let's say you apply for, I'll say, for example, you apply for medicine residency. Usually you apply for a categorical program, and they're usually 3 years. And by the time you're done, you're trained in your specialty. But you can apply for preliminary internal medicine programs too. What it does is you get a spot for 1 year, and you have to apply to a categorical program that year when you're in your prelim training so that you match into a categorical program. But when you're in your prelim medicine year, you can apply for other programs as well, with the understanding that if you don't get them, you're done with that 1 year. You cannot go into advance your training. It's just 1 year temporary training. So, and again, there are different kinds of, like, depending on the institution you apply. So there are university-based residency programs and there are community-based residency programs. So your university-based residency programs are the larger programs. They have up to 20 to 30 residents per class. Your community programs are small to medium-sized programs, but there are about 10 to 15 per class. And again, if you're training for, like, the different residencies have different sizes. I'm just talking about internal medicine, but university programs always have more trainees than community programs because you're training in a university-based system, which has about 3 to 4 hospitals, whereas a community-based system has only 1 hospital. The advantages of a university program are they are more flexible with your visas, but they do emphasize on research and they do emphasize on tracks. And they also have most of the fellowships in-house. So if you're getting into a university program, you don't have to go around trying to get to a fellowship. You have a fellowship in-house, and as long as you're performing with your residency class, you can get into a fellowship. But they're going to emphasize more on research and more on a track, which is basically what your work life wants you to be. That is, you can go around, you can go on a research track where you can do like 3 years of medicine and 1 year of research, or they will ask you to do like a rural track. So you can pick a track that you want to do, Or let's say you're focused on medical education, then you can do a clinician educator track, or you can do a clinician scientist track. So they do have a lot of tracks, and depending on the universities that you interview, they will kind of describe the tracks and kind of try to find out which track is good for you. In community programs, they usually don't have fellowships, and even if they have fellowships, they're very, very limited. They probably have like some fellowships, and they usually take very less fellows compared to university programs. The research is very, very subjective. That is, you have to do your own research. There is not set researchers who are there. You initiate your research, you do it, and you can publish and present, but it's all your initiation and your effort. And usually community programs don't have those tracks, like a clinician educator or a clinician scientist, or it's community programs are set to get you to where you are. University programs help you to kind of train you in academic medicine / private medicine / a scientist. Let's say you're a person who is interested in running clinical trials. You will find university programs that offer you kind of help you train about how to initiate a clinical trial. How do you write grants? How do you write proposals? How do you like account for the patients? How do you account for the money? How do you run it? What are the stuff you need? So they will kind of direct your education towards that. Okay, so to get into a university program is relatively harder because, again, you're competing with US medical grads who want to be in that program. Most universities do have their own medical schools, so they would try to have their own medical school students who want to get into their program. So if you want to get into a university program, you need to have your publications, you need to have your presentations, your clerkships, everything. And again, clerkship is the same as externship. It's kind of similar. So you need to have all of those with great scores if you want to get into a university program. A community program is relatively easier compared to the university program. And if you have decent scores and you have clinical experience, the chances of you getting into a community program are higher. So again, tracks. Like I said before, there are usually 3 tracks. Again, depending on the universities that you go, the tracks might get more defined or less defined. I've just put in a broad overview of the tracks. Hold on one second. I put in a broad overview of the tracks. So one of the tracks is primary care, where they train you more towards outpatient management because you'll be doing a lot more clinics than inpatient. So you are basically getting trained to how to perform or survive in an outpatient environment. There is research tracks where you have dedicated years of research built into a training. And then you have your educator track where you have dedicated electives which are set into your training for becoming a clinician educator. What do I mean by clinician educator is you get to join a university and you became like an assistant professor, or you're an instructor and you continue teaching medical students and so on and so forth. So those are basically the broad tracks, but depending on the programs you interview for, you can select out some night tracks as well. So moving on, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how competitive the specialties are. So this is NRMP data. So I did tell you what the NRMP acronym stands for. It's the National Residency Matching Program. So they are the ones who kind of tell you who matched and everything. So the top 10 specialties in the US, which is matched by US medical school graduates, are plastic surgery, ped psychiatry, ENT, neurosurgery, thoracic surgery, family medicine, vascular surgery, medicine, pediatrics. This is not your pediatrics, this is medicine and pediatrics, so you're double board certified, orthopedic and interventional radiology. So these are the most competitive specialties. So if you're trying for any of these specialties, your application has to be best among the best, because this is competitive even for medical school graduates from the US. So, and when I mean competitive, the medical school graduates who apply for these specialties, they will have at least 3 papers, 2 posters in national conferences, and they would have done a ton of elective and a lot more stuff to get into these specialties. So if you want to get into these specialties, you make sure that your scores are stellar, you have done a clerkship, you have an observership, and I would say research at least 2 years into any of these specialties, specialty focused research, then your chances of getting into these specialties are higher than when you started. But that doesn't mean you cannot get into any of these specialties. So this is data from NRMP again on how many positions are offered and how many of them are filled. So if you see the last bar, which is kind of a surrogate marker for being filled by American graduates. So whenever they say MD seniors, it means they're filled purely by American grads. So among them, if you look at it, the most number of positions offered is internal medicine, so which is categorical, C is categorical. So the most number of positions offered is 9,000. Out of them, 8,700 positions were filled, and only less than 1/3 was filled by American grads. So this is where a lot of the IMGs go into. The second is family medicine, and then the third is pediatrics. So more positions offered, the chances of IMGs matching into that specialty are relatively easier just because of the volume of positions offered. But if you look at some of the other, let's say neurological surgery, there are only 232 positions offered for neurosurgery. Again, derm, I think someone had a question on derm. There are about 538 positions offered and 529 were the positions that are filled, and 400 were filled by US medical seniors. So this does not include graduates from, so US medical seniors says it's only from medical schools in continental US. But the medical schools in the Caribbean, there are medical schools which are outside close to the US, which are grouped into IMGs, but their clinical experience is in the US. So they do take up a bulk of these competitive specialties too. I do have a slide showing that. So again, if you go down, the lesser the number of positions offered, the more competitive it is, and the more numbers filled by medical school students from the competitive US. So this is just IMG statistics. So, and I have marked some of the specialties that are, that has a lot more or common specialties. So if you look at IM, we have about 3,000 spots that goes to international medical grads, which is about 45.6% of the total, which is actually dropping. This is 2016, which we had more IMGs compared to 2020, where there is less IMGs. So although the number of spots has gone up, the total number of IMGs coming into these programs have dropped, which means they're getting a little bit more competitive. Family medicine, kind of similar, and you can kind of look at all, and derm, there is only 2 spots which were taken by international medical graduates. Surgery, about 2. So again, if you end up in a preliminary program in surgery, the chances of you making it to the categorical program is about half. So it's very competitive to move from a surgery prelim to categorical. And psychiatry about 293, which is about 4%, pediatrics 562, about 7%, pathology 286, about 3.9%. So whatever specialty you want to pick, you can look at this chart and see how competitive or less competitive your specialty is. And that will kind of help you plan how much you have to put in to get there and how much you have to not put in. And medicine dermatology is a combined track, and they do not have any IMGs getting in because it's probably a newer program. But the established programs, you do have a little bit of IMGs getting into everything. This also tells you that you can get into any specialty you want. It's not impossible. It is possible, but you have to put in the work. The work meaning clerkship, observership, LORs, research, publications, presentations, posters, contacts, recommendations, everything to get into these competitive specialties. And I would say getting into an internal medicine residency is easier for that same reason, because you do have the number of spots are much higher. So you can get into them. But let's say you want to get into a university program, to an internal medicine residency, that is going to be hard because you have to compete with the best. So like I said, clerkship, high scores, presentations and conferences, publications and peer-reviewed, PubMed index journals, and recommendations are the biggest things that will help you into a competitive residency. And you have to try, and keep trying until you get there. And again, you keep doing all of the same things again and again and again until you get there. So ideal scenario after medical school would be you have to apply for your residency of choice, and depending on which specialty you have to apply into, you have to decide on how many programs you apply. So let's say you're applying for a competitive specialty, you basically apply to all the programs available across the country. But if you're applying for a specialty which has a lot of options, like internal medicine, which has about 9,000 spots, then you can try to limit the programs. And they're usually Facebook groups every year through close to the match, and they will kind of tell you that these programs take IMGs and these programs don't. And you can kind of decide from the chatter and decide which programs you want to apply. But roughly, you apply for about 150 to 200 programs for internal medicine. For like competitive programs, like let's say radiology or any surgery, you apply to all the you apply to all the programs across the board and try to hope for the best. You need at least 3 US-based good LORs from US clinical experience. Again, 2 to 3 is the number they're looking for. If you have 3, that's awesome, and 1 Indian LOR, that's perfect. But if you get 2, that's okay too. It's not a make or break. You need 2 to 3. Ongoing US clinical experience, like when you are interviewing, if you're in an observership or when you're interviewing, you're doing some research, that helps. Any publication, any presentation, that helps. Prepare for your interviews. They are looking, they are interested to talk to you. That's why they brought you there. So make sure you're fully prepared and you submit the rank list and you get matched. So how much this is going to be a financial strain? It's going to be about 20 to 30 lakhs with all your exam fees, your travel, your applications, all of them together will be like 20 to 30 lakhs, or 20,000 to 25,000 US dollars. That's how much you are looking to spend in a period of 1 to 2 years. Except research, if you get a paid research opportunity, you will get paid when you're doing it. But other than that, all of this is you are spending your money to do this. But once you start residency, you're getting paid. So you can recuperate those losses within the first 2 years of your residency. That is easily doable, but you are spending when you're applying. So visas, very important. When you want to travel to the visas, when you want to travel to the US, you need a visa. So when you're doing basically your externship or observership or research, you can do them on a B1. But if you're getting a paid research, you have to go into a J1 or an F1. So B1 is basically a business/tourist visa, which is used for most people who travel for either business or pleasure. F1 is the student visa. So if you're enrolled in any of the MBA or MSCS programs or MPH, or if you're doing some sort of college education in the US, like you're attending some course in the US, you're on an F1. If you're doing research, paid research, or if you're a resident, you'll be on a J1, which is an exchange visitor. H1 is the work visa. And let's say you're married to someone here who is on a visa, you can get EAD, which is you can get work authorization, and you can do all the stuff on the DAD. So that's your visas. That's again a brief overview. And I think I'm done with that. That's basically my talk. And I know I have a lot of questions that popped up on my chat. Hey boss, do you mind answering? Should I start answering the questions? Okay. So I think the first one is how to gain US clinical experience. So I think I went through that in my talk. So depending on where you are at, if you're in medical school, apply for clerkship or externship. If you finished your medical school, start searching for observerships or try to do research if you are interested in research. So that's where I would start. Join the Facebook groups. There's usually a chatter in Facebook groups. The groups are usually called USMLE Step 1 or Residency for US, and they will have like a running list of what are the programs that take clerkships, what are the programs that take observerships, what are the programs that allow that kind of get research and stuff like that. So join the chatter and keep looking and keep emailing, keep trying to get in contact with them. And that's how you get your clinical experience. I think I said how long I did that. Is there a specific month of the year? No, the exams are happening all around the year. So you get to pick when you want to take that exam. And it's basically contingent upon, I think, Prometric having availability. And especially with COVID, the rules are so different. They keep changing it quite often. So I would say whenever and they give you pick a 3-month window when you want to take the exam. And within the 3-month window, you get to pick a date. So that's basically how it rolls. So when you apply, they'll ask you like, okay, which 3-month window you want? And they'll give you that 3-month window and you have to pick a date within the 3-month window. Okay, DM nephrology from India. Oh, fellow nephrologist. What is the procedure for doing fellowship from US? So basically you have to have your steps 1, 2, and 3 done. And you have to get ECFMG certified. And you have to find a program that will accept you as a fellow directly, which I do know of some programs that do. And then you apply through the match. You submit your applications through ERAS, which is where that's your application page. It's electronic residency application service. You submit your application through ERAS, and then you submit your application through ERAS. They forward it to the programs. You get invited for interviews. After interview, you match. Then you do fellowship for 2 years. And once you finish your fellowship, then you apply for the board, which is the American Board of Internal Medicine Nephrology, and that's how you get board certified. So I think that's the process to get board certified in nephrology from the US and fellowship. How I got USCE, did the same thing, emailed a whole bunch of people and followed up, and the only person who replied, that's how I got my observership. Is a publication in India valid? Yes, any publication is valid. And if your publication is PubMed indexed, or if it's indexed in the national libraries, it's even more valid. The DM nephrology, I think I answered it. Will a government medical college in Tamil Nadu give us permission for clerkship? Yes. I have known a couple of my juniors from Stanley who did clerkships in the US. They did end up in the same program they did clerkship on. So it is doable. The only part I would say is tricky. So when they timed it between finishing your 4th year exams and before that certificate comes out. So that's when they did the clerkship for 2 months. So that's basically how they got through without taking any leave, because I know getting leave in India in the medical school in Tamil Nadu is very difficult, but that's how they did it. But if you're in a private medical school, they do allow you to do clerkships as part of your academic year. So it all depends on how your medical school decides to do it. Externships, I think, is the same as clerkship. I emailed, I did say tracks. Will your MBBS university marks matter? Yes, because that's how your MSP comes out. So MSP basically says, among your peers, you scored in the top 1%, or you are the 99th percentile, or you scored in the top 5% and you're in the 95th percentile. So your absolute marks don't matter, but the distribution of marks in your class and where your marks stand kind of matters. It's very, very relative. It's not specific, but it kind of matters in the big scheme of things. So it's in your MSPE. That's what makes your MSPE. Like, let's say, for example, you scored 75% in surgery. All your medical school, your average medical school in your medical class, the average score was 55. You scored 75, and your MSP will say you are in the top 1% of the class because most of your peers scored 55. But if your peers scored 75 and you scored 75, it will say you are among the average score in your class. That's basically how your medical school marks would matter. I think I answered the derm question, very competitive. I showed you the graph too. And you can also look at and RMP data as well. It is extremely competitive to get into dermatology. So everything, all of the above, plus tons of research. IFOM, I do not know what IFOM is, but if you like the US way of life, USMLE is way better, I can tell you. Do we need contacts for USC? Yes, if you have contacts who can help you into a program for US clinical experience, that's awesome. But if you cannot, if you email and if you go to the group chatter and find it, you could be done. So there is no such thing as ECFMG sponsored. They do have a second association through which they verify. So I think most medical schools in India are already verified, but they probably do not have the direct e-verification. So if you call ECFMG, just call them during their work hours, which is kind of the middle of the night in India, and they will actually guide you through the process of how you can get it done. It's really hard. I tried to do it in Stanley Medical College to try to get us e-verified for ECFMG. They would not do it. So we still, I think, I don't know if that changed later, but we got it done through post, and I talked to ECFMG and they usually guide you through the process. As long as you are in that recognition, which is like a third list that comes off of ECFMG, you should be fine. Which is the best time to go for USC? Is it better to take it an internship or before or after that? So if you want to do clerkships, you have to do it before you start your internship. If you want to do observership, you can do it anytime after your internship. So that's basically, the time is, I would say, if you can get to a clerkship, do it. That's very, 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 very valuable for a competitive fellowship. If you want, or a residency, if you can get into a clerkship. Is there a way I could get hands-on clinical experience after I graduated? I do not think so, but you can. If you have your steps 1, 2, and 3, and you can do some sort of a hands-on clinical experience. The only complication I would see is that your visa might have to be a little bit tricky, but it's not impossible. It is possible, but you have to have all your steps because they will not let you touch patients if you don't have your steps. So that's the biggest hurdle, I would say. So step 1, 2, 3, even after DM, yes, because they do not recognize. So basically, to practice medicine in the US, you have to have steps 1 and 2 because they do not. It's kind of like the NEET exit test. USMLE is kind of like the NEET exit test. So, which I don't know what's going on with that, but you have to have steps 1 and 2 before any state would license you, or you can do a fellowship. So if you want to do any sort of hands-on thing in the US, you have to have steps 1, 2, and 3 is essential because you need a license to practice. The only way you get a license is you need to do step 3. So that's how we have. I'm a pre-final student, which will be the best time to have electives. You can do it whenever, as long as your medical school approves. So start working on it right now. Do we have to do the whole? No, you don't have to do the residency. But you have to do the residency if you want to practice in the US. So if you want to just do fellowship, you don't need a residency. But a fellowship would not make you eligible to practice in the US because all the state laws or the state licensing laws will require you to have 3 years of clinical medicine training for you to be able to practice. So you don't have to do the residency if you don't want to practice in the US. If you just want to do a fellowship, get board certification, go back to India, you can do that. But if you want to practice in the US, you have to go through the whole residency again and need to practice. Going for specialty or super specialty, which is better? Again, there are some residencies and which are direct super specialty residencies. There are some which are specialties. I would say specialties are relatively easier because they are not as competitive as applying for a super specialty residency because the US medical graduates prefer super specialty residencies. So, but if you have a strong application, you can apply for one too, and it takes years of your training as well. Should clerkship, you have to do a clerkship when you're a medical student. So after you're done after you're done your medical school training, you cannot do clerkships. So that's kind of the caveat. So if you get your provisional pass certificate, you cannot do a clerkship. Are presenting papers, conferences in India valid? Yes, they are valid. But if you presented an American Society conference, it's even more valid. Will we get enough time for doing electives between actual CRR ending and graduate certificate generation? Yes, I think when I did mine, my certificates came in August, end of August. An actual CRR ending happens in April. So you can do observerships anytime after. That should not be a problem. My medical class, do you mean the university class or individual college? I mean, if your MSP is issued by your college, it's your college. If it's issued by the university, then it's your whole university. It's based on who issues your MSP. I think it's usually the medical school. Can we not do clerkship during CRI? No, you cannot do clerkship during CRI because you have to be a medical student. If you're doing an early 6 research in Tamil Nadu, if you haven't done a research internship in your state, will that be competitive? If you're doing 6 research. So basically, when you're applying for a competitive residency, think of it this way, that the medical school graduates who are applying for that competitive residency in the United States have done research and they have presented and they've done posters as well. So as long as your research is valid and equal to what they're doing, or let's say you're published in some of the big journals, yes. But if your research is not that valid, then it's going to be really hard to get into a competitive residency. Is it possible to apply for you cannot repeat your residency, unfortunately. So what I'm saying by that is you can read, what I'm trying to tell you is, let's say you do a medicine residency, you can do other specialty residency, but you cannot repeat a medicine pediatrics residency because of the visa restrictions on it. So it's kind of you have to work around. You can apply for a competitive residency. Like, let's say you can do a medicine residency. You want to do radiation oncology, for example. You can do a medicine residency and then you can do a radiation oncology residency. That's doable. But again, think about it that you did 3 years of your medicine residency and you're again having to do a residency for like 4 or 5 years. So it is a long training, but it is possible. But you cannot repeat, let's say you do 2 years of medicine, you cannot again do 2 years of medicine again. You cannot because of your visa restrictions. Is it a bad time for, no, I would say you can start your USMLE preparation anytime you want to do it. It's just keep mindful of the timeline and you have to keep doing all the stuff that I mentioned in the talk. I think that's all the questions. So the case publication. So if you do PubMed, PubMed is what we go by. So and as long as if you're indexed, as long as the journal which you're publishing is indexed in PubMed, it counts. Case reports are, so if you're looking at publications, if you have manuscripts, research manuscripts, those are the best. Then comes your review articles, then comes case reports. That's the way those articles are ranked. So if you have an indexed, if you have a PMID number or it's indexed, that's good. If not, it's not good. But as long as it's peer reviewed, it counts to something. How about pathology residency? I think there was a slide that I showed, I think it's about 5%. Is it possible to work in India? Of course. You can work anywhere in the world if you have a residency in the US because you're certified by the American board. So you can work anywhere in the world, literally. What source you recommend for preparing step 1? Any source and every source you can find. The more you read, the better you get at preparing step 1. And think about it that the best, if you are really thoroughly prepared for your step 1, your step 2 and step 3 get way easier. So any and every source you find, do it. What does GC mean? What does what does GC mean? Oh, excellent question. So you do not get a green card right after you do your residency. So depending on your visa status and depending on, it's a whole different talk. It's very complicated, but doing a residency does not mean you get a green card. It can take anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years after you do your residency to get a green card, depending on what visa you did your residency on, and depending on what job you do and how academically published or prolific you are. So that is a whole different process. That is not, that is not, that is a whole different process. I wouldn't combine this and that. Pathology residency. So pathology residency is relatively competitive. The reason I say that is it does not have as many spots like internal medicine, because I think internal medicine has about 9,000 spots, but pathology residency, I'm not sure how many spots it has on the top of my head, but the spots are less compared to internal medicine. It has about 603 spots, and it was filled by 204 spots were taken up by US seniors, and you have about a 4% chance of matching. So IMGs made about 4% of pathology residency spots compared to 45% in internal medicine, just because of the sheer volume of spots. So you can get it, but you have to be a little bit competitive in that sense. You have to get your LORs, research, clerkship, observership, and you should be able to get it. Will first aid be enough? First aid is the basic requirement. It's not just enough. Again, like I said before, you cannot quantify. So when you're taking USMLE, you have to understand that if you memorize a book full of facts, that's not going to get you for step one. You have to go through your basic sciences. That is, you have to know all the concepts in your basic sciences, your physiology, pathology, biochem, anatomy, all your basic sciences, and you have to know how to apply them into your clinical questions, because they're not going to ask you what are the EKG changes in myocardial infarction. They're going to give you a case of myocardial infarction. They're going to show you the EKG changes, and then they're going to ask you what the pathology is. Is it a subendocardial infarct, or is it an epicardial ischemia, or is it a myocardial cushion? So they're going to ask you that. So to prepare for step one, you have to know the facts. You have to be able to backtrack them to your concepts. For example, your T wave changes and STT changes, which happens at specific regions of ischemia, which is a subendocardial or epicardial or something. Or let's say you can take hyperkalemia, which causes EKG changes. You would know hyperkalemia causes peak T waves, but where is that change? Which channel is it changing, or which channel is getting depolarized, or what's your action potential change? They're not going to ask that. They're going to ask how you apply that changes into action potential. Yes, your standard textbooks are the more applied you are on your basic sciences from those textbooks, that will help you with your USMLEs, because you learn how to apply. And again, they're not testing your knowledge, they're testing your application. It's a slightly different exam. They're not going to ask you what is the most common. They're going to tell you that this is the most common, but they're going to ask you why. Why is it more common than something else which is less common? And you have to know why something is more common and why something is less common, so that you can identify the difference and be able to pick the right choice from those 4 choices, which are going to be very, very, very close to each other. So it's a test of your application skills. It's not a test of your knowledge, but it indirectly tests your knowledge. Anything and everything that you can come across, any source will help your preparation. Anything and everything. It's totally different. it does not change things. Maybe it helps you with your visa, but I don't know how it changes because I do not know any of this stuff. I can tell you all about Indian visas and stuff, but I do not know how Singapore does. But it's gonna change. It's gonna be changed. Uh, I don't know. That's basically my answer to you. Can students match to internal medicine with just core and maybe one observership score somewhere different both steps? Um, yes. Students match to internal medicine. Yes. Maybe one observership. Again, nothing is impossible. You can match. You can match with one LOR. You can match with great scores. But if you want to apply for a more competitive program, that's not going to be enough. But there are some programs which will take you, but they're not as competitive as the other programs because the more competitive you're going to go, they're going to look for more stuff too. That's the way it works. What resources you used? I used a lot of books, a lot of resources. So basically, first aid is the basic requirement. You have to do all your Kaplan videos, Kaplan questions. You have to do a lot of question banks, which is all the question banks you come across. And again, I did this 7 years ago, okay? So 7 years ago, I used all the resources that I had at that time. I don't know what the resources now are out there because I'm out of that league and I'm done with all of those. So whatever I am saying about my resources is not going to be the best information for you. But I would, with that, I said Kaplan, first aid, all the question banks, which is UWorld. And then there is the list of books that you need to study, which is basically, I mean, Robbins pathology, your Golgin's pathology review, your anatomy books, physiology would be Guyton, biochem would, I think, biochem was not Harper or Lippincotts. And then you have to do your farm, which is, I mean, Arun Kumar knows farm because he taught me pharmacology. So he knows, he can teach you farm. He's the best guy for pharmacology. And then, yeah, basically you have to read your basic sciences books as well as read any and every book you find. Yes, you can. You can take USMLE, US clinical experience. Yes, you can before step one, but it's going to be very tricky to find those programs for taking them. Managing expenses, just for USMLE, it's about, I think, $3,000. That's your exam fees alone. And then the rest of the stuff add up. So ballpark is 20,000 for the whole thing until you get there. Thank you. Thank you. Average pay on your residency starts somewhere at about, depending on the program you match and depending on whether it's in a high cost of living area, you can start somewhere from $60,000 a year and go up to 70,000 or 75,000. And it changes. It's nationally, it's by a national commission that regulates your pay, but you will be paid very, very adequately. So it's a lot of, I mean, it's basically the pay for your residency is basically the pay that engineers get when they start a job after their master's. So you are well compensated in that regard.